All right, so what we're going to do now is talk about book four. And the Republic is going to start getting a little heavier for us, so especially in book five. All right, so why be a guardian? Picking up where book three ended, the beginning of book four, Glaucon asked Socrates, "What would your apology be, Socrates, if someone were to say that you're hardly making these men, that is the guardians, happy, and further, that it's their own fault? They, to whom the city in truth belongs, but who enjoy nothing good from the city, as do the others." So, a couple of things here. By apology is not meant, um, he's asking to say, I'm sorry, right? This is a different sense of apology, actually, the older sense. And apology here means defense. So, really, it's what is your defense? What would your defense, Socrates, be if I said that these guardians that we've been talking about in book two, they're not going to be very happy because here they have all the power, but they get nothing from all of that political power, right? What would you say to that? It seems like you wouldn't want to be a guardian in this town, right? Um, Socrates concedes some of this point, 428. He says, we'll say that it wouldn't be surprising if these men, that is, the guardians, were also the happiest. So he thinks that, frankly, they're going to be the happiest people in the city, regardless of the fact that their lifestyle is pretty Spartan, right? However, in founding the city, we are not looking to the exceptional happiness of any one group among us, but as far as possible, the happiness of the city as a whole. So Socrates is saying he actually thinks that, and you'll see why when we get a full idea of what it really takes to be a guardian in Socrates' proper sense of the word here later in further books. But what he's saying is that, in fact, he believes that the guardians, in the proper sense of the word, will be the happiest people in the ideal city or the just city. But even if they weren't, the point is not that any one group should be exceptional and be happier than the others, rather that the city as a whole should be happy. Okay, the unity of the city and specialization shows up again at 423. The other citizens, too, must be brought to that which naturally suits them, one man, one job, so that each man, practicing his own, which is one, will not become many, but one. And thus, you see, the whole city will naturally grow and be one and not many. Um, the idea here is he might say that this principle of specialization is coming in, um, talking about previously the city and how the city should be one and not many. And indeed, the individual should be also one and not many. And you become one and not many by doing your own thing and not trying to do someone else's thing, right? This is the principle of specialization. You do what you're suited for, and I'll do what I'm suited for. Some people are suited to rule, some people to be auxiliaries, and some people to farm, and some people to train horses, etc., etc. Everyone does their thing. They should specialize. Right? This is indeed, he said, a lesser task than the other. That is, making a law to the effect that everyone should do their own thing and not someone else's. Yet, my good Adeimantus, I said, Socrates says, these are not, as one might think, many great commandments we are imposing on them, but they are slight if, as the saying goes, they guard the one great, or rather than great, the sufficient thing. What is the sufficient thing? The one great sufficient thing that is going to make these rules, especially the rule that everyone should do their own thing, the principle of specialization, a slight rule or a slight law in the ideal city. Remember, they're laying down laws for the ideal city. The one that we're looking at now is that everyone should do their own thing, and they should be placed, as it were, in those occupations in the city that they're most suited for. And he says, well, that's going to be a slight thing if we keep in mind this one and we guard this one great, one sufficient thing, which is proper education. Right? This is what education is supposed to get you in the ideal city, namely an idea of what it is that you're supposed to do, and why you should be doing that, and not something else. Why you should specialize and what you should specialize in, as it were. So there must be no innovation in gymnastics. Okay, so this is interesting, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, but it's a really fascinating part of Book 4. Plato is setting down laws in Book 4 here, and he has a lot to say about music. He thinks the music should be censored rather heavily, as well as what he's calling here gymnastic, which is exercise and training. There must be no innovation in music, contrary to the established order. What does Socrates suggest about music in the ideal city? Why do you think he is interested in censoring music? Do you agree that music has such political consequences, as Plato clearly seems to think that it does? So that, as Socrates says in the Republic, it is here in music that the guardians must build the guardhouse. Right? To guard against the wrong kind of music. What kind of an effect do you think music has on people? And what kind of effect does music seem to have on people according to Socrates? And do you agree with that? These are the kind of questions that I might ask you about the censorship of music section. Not going to ask you very much about it. All right. Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the Republic, right? The Kallipolis. This is a Greek term for the beautiful city. And this is what they've been building in words, the ideal or perfect city, the Kallipolis. So then, son of Ariston, that is Glaucon and Adeimantus, or Glaucon in this case. So then, son of Ariston, I said, your city would now be founded. They finished the city at this point, right? They're done. They have the perfect city. In the next place, get yourself an adequate light somewhere and look yourself whether we can somehow see where the justice might be and where the injustice, in what they differ from one another, and which the man who's going to be happy must possess, whether it escapes the notice of all gods and humans or not. So now he's coming back to response to Glaucon's original challenge in Book 2, right? So when we finish the city, the idea was if we can find where justice is in the city, we'll be able to find then where it is in the soul. So now that we found it in the city, get an adequate light somewhere, right? And this is kind of an important metaphor, as you'll see much later. Get an adequate light somewhere and look and see if we can answer the question. Now then, I hope I'll find it in this way. I suppose that our city, that we've been building in words, this ideal, perfect city, the Kallipolis, the beautiful city, I suppose that our city, if that is, it has been correctly founded, is perfectly good, right? It's perfect because it doesn't live anywhere in the real world. You can't visit this city and go build a house there, right? It's an idea city. It only lives in the argument or in the ideas that make it up. That's how they can build a perfect city, a perfectly just city, and thus find where justice is. All actual cities, the ones that you could go visit, like Albuquerque or New York City, well, they're not perfectly just. So you're not going to be able to go there and identify justice. You can't. In other words, take an example, you have to build an ideal one in order for this project to work. All right, so it's perfectly good. Well, if it's perfectly good, then it has what are sometimes called the cardinal virtues. It's going to be wise, courageous, moderate, and just. And remember, what we're looking for is just, right? Justice. So, the perfectly good city embodies the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. Sometimes, by the way, in our text, it's wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. Sometimes courage is also called fortitude. Sometimes moderation is also called temperance. But wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. So we should be able to identify them all in the city we built. in the imagination. Isn't it the case that whichever of them we happen to find will leave as the remainder what has been found? This is a little odd, but it belies, it shows what Socrates' strategy for finding justice is going to be now that they've completed the task of sort of constructing or building the city of words. But if we recognize the other three first, the other three virtues, namely wisdom, courage, and moderation, if we recognize wisdom, courage, and moderation first, this would also suffice for the recognition of the thing looked for, namely justice. For plainly, it couldn't be anything but what's left over. That's the strategy. We're going to identify what wisdom is, where it's to be found in the perfect city. We're going to identify what courage is and where we would find it in the ideal city, the perfectly good city. And then we're going to be able to find moderation and what it is that makes the perfectly good city moderate city. And then we'll be able to find justice because it'll be left over. And that is, after all, what we're looking for. All right. Where are each of the virtues to be found in the city, and what are the virtues anyhow? We need to define them and locate them. So definition and location. Wisdom, defined as good counsel. It's a guardian's skill, right? Properly, it's the guardians that have the skill at good counsel if they're good guardians. Where is it to be found? In those rulers, it should be rulers, I'm sorry, typo. In those rulers whom we just now named perfect guardians. So it's the guardian class of citizens in the ideal or perfect city that make the city as a whole wise because they have good counsel. You notice that he also throws in here, 428e, the fact that the guardians are the fewest in number. They're going to be the rarest citizen, and their skills are going to be the rarest skills, so there's going to be fewer of them than there are, say, farmers and merchants. So, wisdom means good counsel is found in the guardian class, because it's the guardian class that makes the city wise. Courage, 429a, defined as a certain kind of preserving, more specifically, the power that through everything will preserve the opinion about which things are terrible, that they are the same ones and of the same sort as those the lawgiver transmitted in the education. So this is a strange definition of courage. And at one point, Socrates in the Republic even admits as much, but claims that, well, if we're going to go down that road, it'll take us much further abroad than we have any reason to. It would be too tangential, but he also admits that it's a strange definition of courage. Suffice to say, it's political courage, right? And at one point he says, well, it'll work as political courage anyway. So it's preserving an opinion about what should be feared and what should not be feared, as per your proper education given by the state. So you get an education and you are told what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of. And courage is the preservation of the opinion about what is proper to be afraid of and what is not proper to be afraid of. Just as a little hint here, injustice is going to be something that you should be afraid of, and justice is something which should not be afraid of. Death is going to be something that you should not be afraid of, and injustice is something that you should view as terrible. At least that's going to be the upshot eventually. We're getting a little ahead there, though. But nonetheless, courage is a certain kind of preserving an opinion about what you should fear. Where is courage found? Pretty straightforward here. It's in the auxiliary group, right? The one part that defends the city and takes the field in its behalf. That is, it's the warrior class, the group of, he calls them auxiliaries, right? They're the military class. When the military is courageous, the city as a whole is courageous. So there's our definition and the part of the city that courage is to be found in. Also note the analogy of the dyers. And he says that proper education for the education and training for the auxiliary class, the military group, proper education is going to be like dyeing wool. If you dye it properly, the dye will be fast and it won't wash out, right? So similarly, the auxiliaries need to be educated so that the opinion about what should be feared and what should not be feared won't wash out. All right. Moderation, the definition, is more like a kind of accord and harmony than the previous virtues. So it's kind of an accord or a harmony among different parts rather than being in one part. Something that moderation, you'll see, shares with justice. It doesn't reside in one particular class of the city like wisdom and courage do. Rather, it's an accord between many different parts of the city. So it's throughout the city. Better definition comes later. A kind of order and mastery of certain kinds of pleasures and desires. As when men say they use, I don't know what way, the phrase stronger than himself, and some other phrases of that sort are used that are, as it were, the tracks of the idea of moderation. So we're on the hunt for moderation, and one of the tracks is that people say that guy is stronger than himself, right? Or we might more readily say today, he's got control of himself. Socrates points out, well, on the face of it, that's kind of a ridiculous thing to say. How can somebody have control of himself? Or how can somebody be stronger than himself? As apparently the Greeks said. Because how can the same thing be both in control of itself and the thing that's being controlled, right? Or stronger than himself. It seems like there'd be two, but there isn't two because there's one person, right? So that's a little silly, but we do talk that way. What must we mean? It must mean that in the same human being, there is something better and something worse. The phrase is used when that which is better by nature is master over that which is worse, right? So, in other words, in the individual, there's two parts. One part is controlling the other part. And someone is moderate when they are stronger than themselves in the sense that the better part is in control of the worst part, right? But it's still one individual. If there's any city in which the rulers and the ruled have the same opinion about who should rule, then it's this one, the ideal city. So we can say that for the city, moderation is agreement on who should rule. You see how that plays out? Moderation, then, we'll define it as agreement on who should rule. When there's agreement that the better part should rule the lower part. Right? And that's the kind of harmony because it's an agreement, just like harmony is an agreement, as it were, between chords on a musical instrument. So moderation is an agreement on who should rule in the city. Moderation. Where do we find it? Well, we've sort of already answered this question, but here it is in the words of Socrates. Unlike wisdom and courage, each of which resides in a part of the city, moderation doesn't work that way, but actually stretches throughout the whole from top to bottom of the entire scale, making each part of the city chant together. So everybody is singing from the same hymnal, so to speak. That's what moderation is. And therefore, it's not found in a part, but is found in the whole, when everyone is in agreement about who should rule. Okay, I'm going to come back in another video. I don't want to make these too long, and talk about justice, because that's the one that's left over. So then, Glaucon, we must, like hunters, now station ourselves in a circle around the thicket and pay attention so that justice doesn't slip through somewhere and disappear into obscurity. Clearly, it's somewhere hereabouts. So they're on the hunt for justice, and they got it cornered. They got it surrounded. They got the thicket that justice is hiding in surrounded. Now they're just going to make sure it doesn't escape, and they can find it. And we'll do that in the next little video.